I walk out to the garden most mornings before the coffee is even done brewing. There's something about that hour, the light still soft, the air cool enough that you can see your breath in October, that makes everything feel honest. And for a long time, what I found out there was honest too, in the worst possible way. Thin plants, pale leaves, tomatoes that split before they ripened, carrots that forked like they were trying to escape something underground. I'd amended. I'd fertilized. I'd followed every bag, every label, every YouTube comment section that promised me a breakthrough. And every year the garden told me the same thing: you're missing something. It took me an embarrassing number of seasons to figure out what that something was. But the moment I found it, I couldn't unfind it. And that's what I want to share with you today: not tips, not tricks, not hacks. 10 soil secrets I learned from watching a community of farmers who haven't changed their methods in over 150 years. Stick around to the end, because the last one is the one the fertilizer industry really doesn't want you thinking too hard about. The first thing that stopped me in my tracks was the smell. I was driving through Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and I pulled over because I couldn't figure out what I was looking at. The fields were a different color, not greener exactly, richer, deeper, like the soil itself had weight and darkness that mine didn't. I got out of the truck and I walked up to the edge of the field, which I realize is a strange thing to do on someone else's land, but I needed to understand what I was seeing. I reached down and I picked up a handful of that soil, and it smelled like, there's no other way to say it, like something alive, rich and loamy and almost sweet. My soil at home smelled like dirt. This smelled like biology. That was the moment I started asking questions. Here's what I eventually learned. Amish farmers, particularly those following traditional old order methods, do not treat soil as a medium for delivering fertilizer. They treat it as a living system that they are responsible for maintaining. That is not a small philosophical distinction. It is a completely different starting point, and it produces completely different results. Everything that follows in this video flows from that one idea. The first secret is that they feed the soil, not the plant. This sounds simple. Most people have heard some version of it, but they don't actually do it because doing it requires patience that our culture doesn't reward. When you walk through an Amish kitchen garden, the kind kept by the women of the household, separate from the field crops, you don't see bags of anything. What you see are compost piles that have clearly been working for years, sometimes decades, layered, turned, dark, and crumbling. The composting operation is not a hobby. It is infrastructure. Every kitchen scrap, every animal byproduct, every spent plant goes back to feed the pile. And what comes out the other side is not fertilizer in the way we use that word. It is soil amendment in the truest sense, something that builds the structure, the biology, and the mineral complexity of the ground over time. When you fertilize a plant, you get one season of results. When you build soil, you get compounding returns for generations. That's the trade most of us have never been offered, because nobody profits from you building your own soil. The second secret is what they put in the compost that most people throw away. This one surprised me. Specifically, wood ash, bone scraps from butchering, and what they call night soil, which is a polite historical term for human and animal waste composted to safe temperatures over long periods. Now, I'm not here to tell you to do all of that in your backyard, but the principle underneath it is critical. They waste nothing from the biological cycle. Every element that was grown from the soil eventually returns to it. Wood ash adds potassium and raises pH in acidic soils. Bone meal adds phosphorus in a slow-release form that plants access over months, not days. Animal manure, particularly from horses, which is still the primary draft animal on many Amish farms, adds nitrogen along with microbial life that synthetic fertilizers cannot replicate. The science here is not complicated. It just requires you to think of your yard, your kitchen, and your animals as one closed-loop system rather than a series of disconnected transactions. When you buy nitrogen in a bag, you're making a transaction. When you compost your kitchen waste, you're maintaining a system. These are not the same thing, and the soil knows the difference. The third secret is that they plant by the moon, and the science behind it is more interesting than it sounds. I know how that sentence lands. I was skeptical too. But here's what I observed. When I asked through a neighbor who knew the family why a particular planting schedule was followed so rigidly even when weather might suggest otherwise, the answer wasn't mystical. It was gravitational. The idea is that lunar cycles influence moisture levels in the soil, the same way tides pull on the ocean. Root crops planted during certain lunar phases show better germination and stronger early root development. Leafy crops planted during others produce more above-ground growth. Now, the peer-reviewed research on this is mixed. I'll be straight with you. It is not settled science. But there are studies, including work out of the Biodynamic Research Institute, showing measurable differences in germination rates correlated with lunar phases. What I can tell you practically is this. The Amish farmers I observed didn't just follow the moon. They used it as one layer of a multivariable planting decision that also included soil temperature, frost date memory, passed down verbally through generations, and close daily observation of the plants already in the ground. It's not astrology. It's pattern recognition refined over 150 years of continuous practice. The fourth secret is the way they handle crop rotation, and it's more structured than anything I'd ever read in a gardening book. Most of us rotate in a vague, approximate way. We try not to put tomatoes where tomatoes were last year. Amish field farmers operate on 4-year and sometimes 6-year rotation cycles that are mapped out and recorded, not just remembered. The logic is deep. Each plant family takes specific nutrients from the soil and leaves others behind. Legumes fix nitrogen. Brassicas consume it rapidly. Root crops break up compaction. Small grains leave behind residue that becomes organic matter. When you rotate through these families deliberately, you're not just preventing disease buildup, which is the reason most gardening guides give you. You're actively building the mineral and biological complexity of the soil in a way that no amendment can replicate. The rotation is the amendment. What I also noticed is that fallow ground, land intentionally left unplanted for a season, is still not idle. Cover crops go in. Clover, rye, hairy vetch. The ground is never bare, never exposed, because bare soil loses. It loses moisture, it loses biology, it loses structure to wind and rain. They understood this long before soil science had language for it. The fifth secret is that they almost never till, or when they do, they till as shallowly as they possibly can get away with. This is the one that cost me the most years to unlearn. I tilled every spring. I turned that garden over 8, 10, 12 inches deep and I was proud of it. Looked great. Fluffy, loose, ready. And then I learned what I was actually doing. The top layer of healthy soil contains somewhere between 100 million and 1 billion microorganisms per teaspoon. Fungi, bacteria, protozoa, nematodes, a web of biology that feeds your plants in ways that are only just beginning to be mapped by science. When you deep till, you invert that layer. You bring anaerobic organisms to the surface where they die. You bury the aerobic ones. You sever fungal networks that have taken years to establish. You expose dormant weed seeds by the millions to the light they need to germinate. And then you wonder why your garden has so many weeds. Amish farmers, using horse-drawn equipment, naturally till shallower than tractor-based operations, and many of the kitchen gardens are worked almost entirely by hand, with broad forks that lift and aerate without inverting. The soil structure is maintained. The biology stays intact. The result is ground that, over time, becomes more productive every year instead of requiring more and more input just to stay flat. The sixth secret is how they water, which is almost the opposite of how most modern gardeners water. The tendency, and I had it badly, is to water frequently and shallowly. A little every day. Keep the surface moist. What that actually does is train roots to stay near the surface because that's where the water is. Surface roots are vulnerable roots. They dry out in heat, they freeze in cold, they can't access the deeper mineral layers of the soil. Amish kitchen gardens are watered deeply and infrequently. The goal is to push moisture down 6, 8, 10 inches and then let the surface dry before watering again. What this does is pull roots downward toward the moisture front. Deep roots are resilient roots. They find their own water during dry spells. They access minerals the surface roots never reach. They anchor plants against wind. And there's a secondary effect that most people miss. The dry surface between waterings dramatically reduces fungal disease pressure. Wet leaves and wet soil surfaces are where blights start. If you've ever had a tomato crop taken out by early blight, think about how often you were wetting the surface of that soil and the lower leaves during watering. Deep, infrequent watering delivered at the base of the plant is not just more efficient. It grows fundamentally stronger plants. The seventh secret is the use of mulch in a way that is almost aggressive by modern standards. I'm not talking about a decorative inch of wood chips around the ornamentals. I'm talking about 4 to 6 inches of straw, spoiled hay, or wood chip mulch laid over every bare inch of soil in every bed, every year. The function this serves is not primarily weed suppression, although it does that. The primary function is biological. As that mulch breaks down, and it breaks down continuously, it feeds the fungal networks near the soil surface. It maintains moisture by reducing evaporation. It regulates soil temperature so the biology beneath it can keep working even when surface temperatures swing dramatically. And over time, that breaking down organic material becomes the top layer of new soil. The beds grow. The structure improves. Year after year, without any imported amendment, the soil gets darker and deeper. What I noticed in the older, more established Amish kitchen gardens, the ones that had been in continuous production for 40 or 50 years, was that the soil had a depth of rich, dark material that you couldn't fake. You couldn't bag it and pour it on. It was the product of decades of continuous biological activity that had never been interrupted. The mulch was the machine that kept it running. The eighth secret involves companion planting, but not in the way you've probably read about it. The popular version of companion planting is about keeping pests away. Put basil next to tomatoes. Plant marigolds around the border. These things work to a degree, but the companion planting I observed in Amish gardens is operating on a different level entirely. It's about root architecture. Different plants root at different depths. A shallow-rooted lettuce interplanted with a deep-rooted carrot or parsnip is not competing for the same soil layer. It's occupying a completely different space, above and below ground. The tall plant provides partial shade to the cool season crop beneath it. The ground is fully occupied, which means fewer opportunities for weed establishment. And the mineral uptake is distributed across layers. The deep-rooted plant is mining nutrients from 18 inches down that the shallow plant can't access. And when those deep plants drop leaves or are eventually turned in, they bring those deep minerals to the surface. This is not intuition. This is an observed system that has been refined by generations of people paying close attention to what grows well next to what, and why. The why, it turns out, is usually underground. The ninth secret is patience with failure, and I say that knowing it's the hardest one to sell. The Amish farming tradition does not panic at crop failure the way a commercial operation has to. They store seed. They have root cellars. They have preserved food. They have community. If a crop fails, they learn from it and they return to that ground the next year with better information. What this allows, practically, is long-term thinking about soil health that most of us are structurally unable to do. If you're dependent on one season's harvest, financially, emotionally, you will apply whatever short-term fix gets you through that season. And those short-term fixes compound over time into degraded soil that needs more and more intervention. I'm not saying become Amish. I'm saying look at what the long-term thinking produces and ask yourself if you can reverse engineer any of that patience into your own practice. Start a long-term compost pile and commit to it. Map your rotation out 3 years ahead instead of one. Plant a cover crop on that patch you're not using this season. The results of these decisions aren't visible next month. They're visible in year 3 and year 5, and they are dramatic. Here's where I want to be honest with you about the mistakes most people are making, including the ones I made for a long time, so this next part is worth hearing. The first mistake is buying inputs instead of building systems. Every bag of fertilizer you buy is a substitute for a composting operation you don't have yet. That's not a judgment, it's a description. Start the pile. The second mistake is tilling in the spring because it looks good and feels productive. Walk away from the tiller. Broad fork if you need to aerate. The third mistake is watering every day because it feels like caring. Water deeply and then wait. Resist the impulse. The fourth mistake is leaving soil bare. Bare soil is losing biology every hour it's exposed. Mulch it. Cover crop it. The fifth mistake is thinking about your garden one season at a time. Your soil is a long-term investment. Treat it like one. These aren't exotic corrections. They're just the opposite of what most of us were taught. Because most of what most of us were taught came from an industry that profits from you buying things rather than building things. The bonus, the thing I said I'd save for the end, is this. The water that comes off an Amish farm during heavy rain runs cleaner than the water that comes off a conventionally farmed field. I know that sounds like a marketing claim. There is documented watershed research from Lancaster County and from the Rodale Institute, less than 30 miles apart, that bears this out. The reason is soil structure. Healthy soil with high organic matter and intact fungal networks acts like a sponge. It absorbs rainfall rather than shedding it. It holds nutrients in place rather than letting them run into the watershed. The topsoil doesn't erode because the biology is holding it together. When you build soil the way these farmers build it, you're not just growing food. You're filtering water. You're sequestering carbon. You're reducing your downstream impact on the whole watershed. The corporations that sell you the inputs to replace what healthy soil does naturally have no interest in you understanding that connection. A soil that doesn't need them is a customer they've lost. That's not paranoia, that's just economics. And the best thing you can do in your garden, however small it is start building the kind of soil that doesn't need anyone to sell you anything. It takes time. It takes attention. But the direction you need to travel is simple, and you already know where to start.